Welcome to House of History. Last week we looked at the first of the Hohenzollerns and the complex marriage and inheritance politics that led to a territory that somewhat resembled what would one day be known as Prussia. As these inheritance claims came to fruition, the 30 Years' War broke out, one of the bloodiest wars in European history. For Brandenburg, without any natural borders and with remote territories, it was an absolute disaster. Demographic records show that during the entire war, about half of its population died, with some territories losing up to 80% of their population. It is an interesting time for Brandenburg-Prussia because during this time we will see the destruction and economic standstill of Brandenburg, in part due to its ineffective and weak ruler, Georg Wilhelm. While at the same time the war gave rise to his son, one of the strongest and most important rulers the territory has ever had. Welcome to the complete history of Prussia. Uniting the geographically dispersed territories of Jülich-Klevers, the Duchy of Prussia, and Margravate of Brandenburg under one ruler in personal union skyrocketed the potential of the Hohenzollern clan. As you can see on this map, their territories were not merely a German principality anymore. Whereas Brandenburg was a fief of the Holy Roman Empire, the Duchy of Prussia was a fief of the Polish king. Hohenzollern territories now bordered Poland and Russia in the east and the Netherlands in the west. Johann Sigismund could not enjoy this potential for too long, however. He drank and ate himself to an early grave and passed away in December 1619. He was succeeded as Elector of Brandenburg and Duke of Prussia by his 25-year-old son, Georg Wilhelm. Now, the new Elector wasn't a man with a strategic eye, foresight, or determination. Poor timing had it that it was just then that what would become the 30 Years' War broke out. Brandenburg entered this conflict utterly unprepared. When in May 1618, in Protestant Bohemia, two Catholic representatives of the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II were thrown out of the window, the so-called Third Defenestration of Prague. It marked the beginning of a conflict that would lead to an incredibly bloody and devastating war. The Catholic Emperor and Protestant forces both within the Holy Roman Empire and external forces such as Denmark, Sweden, Spain, the Dutch Republic, and France fought the subsequent war mostly within the territories of the empire. International power struggles such as the control of the Baltics and traditional rivalry between Bourbon France and the Habsburgs were also fought within the German lands. Now, just to describe Brandenburg's precarious situation, imagine the following. To its south were the hereditary lands of the Habsburg Bohemian crown, Lusatia and Silesia. To its west was Electoral Saxony, a traditional ally of the emperor. Then directly to its north, the Protestant Baltic powers Denmark and Sweden could march over its undefended borders. Our Elector didn't have the financial or military means to defend his new territories and, as such, pursued a policy of staunch neutrality. Unfortunately, Georg Wilhelm's father had aligned Brandenburg with the Calvinist Dutch to secure the Jülich-Klevers succession a decade earlier. At Georg Wilhelm's court, the Catholic Count Adam von Schwarzenberg, his primary advisor, persuaded the Elector to align himself with the Catholic emperor. Meanwhile, the two most prominent privy councillors supported the Protestant cause. Georg Wilhelm's priority wasn't the war, though, but to attempt to have the Polish king acknowledge his claim to the Duchy of Prussia. After all, formally the Polish king was still the feudal overlord of the duchy. Unfortunately for the Elector, his mother pursued a policy of her own. She married her daughter to the King of Sweden, Gustavus Adolphus. The Elector was very opposed, considering the Polish crown was at war with Sweden. The Polish king, Sigismund, suspected a Hohenzollern conspiracy, putting Georg Wilhelm in a very, very difficult position. Now, as you can probably tell, the Elector was pushed between forces that he had absolutely no control over. History was incredibly hard on him, something he himself already realized early during his reign. "It pains me greatly," he wrote in July 1626, "that my lands have been wasted in this way and that I have been so disregarded and mocked. The whole world must take me for a cowardly weakling." And unfortunately for him, in 1626, the worst was yet to come. So the Elector had managed to keep Brandenburg out of the conflict between Poland and Sweden at the outset of the war. He pursued the same policy with regard to the Protestant insurgency in Bohemia. Considering Bohemia's Elector Frederick V of the Palatinate, The Winter King led the insurgency and was his brother-in-law. The Elector gave his moral support. But when the Winter King went to war, the Elector stayed out of the conflict. In November 1620, the Battle of White Mountain between Catholic, Imperial and Bohemian forces was fought. The Catholic forces emerged victorious, and all those that supported the rebels were deprived of their properties. 6 years later, Georg Wilhelm's other sister was married off to Bethlen Gabor, a Transylvanian Calvinist prince who had a track record of wars against House Habsburg. Yet, even though the two sisters were married to enemies of the Habsburgs, Georg Wilhelm did all he could to assure his loyalty to the Catholic emperor, steering clear of the anti-imperial alliance closed 2 years earlier between Denmark and England. Due to its stubborn neutrality, Brandenburg drifted into isolation as the war was waging on, both around its territory, but occasionally within its borders at its periphery as well. Brandenburg's neighbor, John George of Saxony, was negotiating with the Catholic parties. In the northwest, the Elector's possessions were occupied by imperial troops under Count Tilly after he emerged victorious from the Battle of Stadtlohn. Meanwhile, the opposition to the House of Habsburg, namely France, England, and the Scandinavian states, started planning a coalition. The Elector only played a marginal role on the fringes of these negotiations, being a pawn for the great powers waging war on the empire. He figured he had to collect funds to raise an army, albeit a small one, to protect his territories. Unfortunately for him, that was easier said than done when the entire empire was burning, with troops quartering in its economic hubs, running them to an absolute standstill. Eventually, the Elector managed to cling on to his neutrality by recruiting a force of 3,000 soldiers in an attempt to prevent the Danish commander Count of Mansfeld from crossing the Altmark and Prignitz in early 1626. Well, this failed miserably. Mansfeld's forces won and mayhem broke out. Churches were plundered, towns were razed, villages torched, and inhabitants slaughtered. These Danish forces now quartered in Brandenburg as if it was their own, although it was a short-lived occupation. Because in April 1626, at the Battle of Dessau Bridge, imperial forces under Albrecht von Wallenstein defeated the Protestant forces of Mansfeld. In August that year, the imperial forces under Count Tilly decisively pushed forces under the Danish king Christian back at the Battle of Lutter. The Danes retreated, leaving a trail of destruction. The imperial forces advanced, destroying everything the Danes had not already. Furthermore, they seized Magdeburg and Halberstadt for their troops to quarter. These were crucial economic hotspots of Brandenburg. Now, as all this was happening, King Gustavus Adolphus landed in Ducal Prussia to the east. He closed the territory off from the sea and quartered his troops there, operating against Poland, disregarding the Elector's claim over the duchy. Furthermore, the Neumark was plundered by Cossack mercenaries, and Mecklenburg was bestowed to the imperial commander Count Wallenstein as a punishment for its duke's support to the Danes. It became very clear Brandenburg's life expectancy was evaporating rapidly if the Elector didn't act, and as such his arm was twisted in joining the Catholic imperial camp. He abandoned his policy of staunch neutrality by signing the Treaty of Königsberg after the defeat of Mansfeld. From now on, he had to accept imperial garrisons to quarter on his territories. If anything, the burden on Brandenburg increased, for Commander Wallenstein was notorious for extracting provisions, lodgings, and payment for his troops from the local population. Brandenburg was in ruins. By the late 1620s, the Catholic forces seemed to reach their zenith of power. Our Elector didn't notice any of it, however. As a matter of fact, the emperor seemed to completely disregard his interests, even though they formerly were allies. In 1629, Emperor Ferdinand issued the Edict of Restitution, reclaiming all ecclesial buildings Catholics had possessed in 1552. This would have disastrous results for Brandenburg, where many of these buildings had come under Protestant control. And then in 1630, Sweden dramatically entered the war on the Protestant side. 10 years before, much to the Elector's opposition, his mother had married his sister to King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, who was now invading the Holy Roman Empire. The Swedish king didn't have any allies within the empire and figured his brother-in-law would make an ideal one. Clinging on to his policy of somewhat neutrality, the Elector was obviously hesitant. Considering the Swedish king had waged war against Russia, Poland, and led conquests into the Baltic, which included the occupation of the Elector's Ducal Prussia, it isn't too difficult to see why. Furthermore, the Swedish king had even forced the elderly Duke of Mecklenburg to ride him into his inheritance for the duchy, directly undercutting the elector's agreement with its northern neighbor. The elector returned to his policy of neutrality, trying to form a neutral bloc with its neighbor Saxony. As he was negotiating, the Swedish forces clashed with imperial troops across the Neumark, routing the Imperials. After that strong victory, the Swedish king demanded an alliance. Although the elector protested, the Swedish king simply marched his troops towards Berlin. He intimidated the elector, and the poor man saw no other way but to throw in his lot with the Swedes. One reason, besides Swedish intimidation for switching, was the fact that the imperial forces had recently sacked the Protestant city of Magdeburg, with over 20,000 casualties as a result. The war crime damaged the prestige of the emperor beyond repair, especially in the elector's eyes. His uncle happened to be the administrator of the city. Now, from June 1631, the elector reluctantly agreed to Swedish troops quartering within his territories, and he paid a monthly contribution to the Swedes. Right as the elector had switched to support the Swedes, the balance of power once again shifted. The Swedish king died in a cavalry melee at the Battle of Lützen in late 1632. After the Swedes suffered another crushing defeat 2 years later at Nördlingen, Emperor Ferdinand decided to sway the elector to sign a peace treaty. The Peace of Prague offered amnesty, but no toleration of Calvinism. Meanwhile, in the background, the Swedes were still pestering the elector for a treaty. He once again decided to try his luck at the imperial side in May 1635, together with Saxony, Bavaria, and several other German territories. Imperial troops were dispatched to Brandenburg to safeguard the mark. The elector was promised Pomerania after the war and given the title Generalissimus, ironic considering his military ineptitude. And you won't be surprised by now, as the elector was raising 25,000 troops to support the imperial side, once again the balance of power shifted. At the Battle of Wittstock in October 1636, the Swedes defeated a Saxon army and once again became the powerhouse of the region. To sum up the last several years, our poor elector attempted to drive the Swedes out of his territories, all the while failing to claim the Duchy of Pomerania. During these last years, Brandenburg was ravaged and plundered by all sides that participated in the war. Even the elector's own mercenaries raised a mark, as he was unable to pay them. After the Swedes invaded Brandenburg in late 1637, the elector, by now a broken man, was forced to flee to the relative safety of Ducal Prussia to the east. He settled in Königsberg, where on the 1st of December 1640, Georg Wilhelm, Margrave and Elector of Brandenburg, Duke of Prussia, passed away. His Margravate of Brandenburg was described by contemporaries as being at the point of dissolution, with many territories, including economic hubs, losing upwards of 80% of their population. This isn't too difficult to imagine. Perhaps the final days of the short-lived realm of Brandenburg-Prussia had arrived, with its history rapidly fading into obscurity. After Georg Wilhelm passed away, he was succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Friedrich Wilhelm, and this new elector was the complete opposite of his father. Both contemporary sources and historiography describe his reign as a model of a ruler, dedicated to his office, a potent icon within the Hohenzollern tradition, if you will, a man that future generations would certainly aspire to model themselves after. After his father's death, he did not return to the burning and looted Brandenburg until March 1643. A letter from his viceroy, Albrecht II, certainly gives a vivid account of the situation in Brandenburg. The country is in such a miserable and impoverished condition, and the cart driven so deep into the mud that it cannot be extricated without the help of the Almighty. According to a contemporary privy councillor, it was only a matter of time until Poland would seize Prussia. Pomerania was to stay under Swedish occupation and Kleve under Dutch control. In short, Brandenburg was on the edge of the abyss. In order to restore the peace in his territories, the elector figured a capable and disciplined military was required. It became the central tenet in his reign that would last for 48 years. But before he had that army, during the last phase of the war, he managed to play the international system to the degree that he actually managed to emerge as a war profiteer from this conflict. So, with 8 more years of war upon his ascension to the throne, how did he do it? Well, towards the end of the war, the French wanted a German client state to support them in future conflicts. Due to French support, the Elector managed to gain parts of eastern Pomerania from the Swedes, a French ally. Then a French-Swedish alliance pressured the Holy Roman Emperor to compensate Brandenburg for the lost portions of Pomerania by granting it lands from the former bishoprics of Halberstadt, Minden and Magdeburg. After the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 concluding the conflict, Brandenburg became bigger than neighboring Saxony. It became the second largest German territory after that of the Habsburgs themselves. The new Elector had managed all this when Brandenburg was still a plundered mess, with a military that was still in ruins. It was all diplomacy. Aside from the territorial acquisitions, the Peace of Westphalia curtailed the emperor's powers. It resulted in all prince-electors of the empire becoming virtual sovereigns within their territories. With all this new potential, the new Elector, 28 years old by the end of the war, embarked on his new mission to gain sovereignty over Ducal Prussia from the Polish crown. How he managed to achieve that we will see next week, but there is a reason why this young Georg Wilhelm would enter the history books as Prussia's great elector. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you check out the playlist with a complete history of Prussia on the screen right now. I would also like to thank all my patrons for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider checking me out on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you will already gain access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.